Welcome. I'm Harmony Slater, your host of the Finding Harmony podcast. Over the past 20 years, I've taught thousands of yoga teachers and students to explore the intersection between ancient wisdom and modern everyday life, using mind-body practices to heal, awaken, and manifest their dreams from the inside out. This podcast is a sanctuary for those feeling overwhelmed by life's challenges. Are you ready to jump in and discover how these challenges aren't actually in the way, but are the way to finding harmony? Let's invite the magic back in. Hi, welcome to the Finding Harmony podcast. I'm so happy you're here today again, joining us, because today I am honored to share this beautiful conversation, a profound conversation, with two of Ashtanga Yoga's most beloved and respected teachers, Richard Freeman and Mary Taylor. They are, of course, beings of light who are shining through in this episode. And we are focused on the question about what does it truly mean to be happy? Richard and Mary are bringing their decades of practice, both in Ashtanga Yoga and Buddhism, and their teaching and their philosophical inquiry into this exploration and offering their deep insights which bridge ancient wisdom with modern living. You are going to love this conversation because they have such a unique lens that is woven around yoga philosophy, meditation, embodiment, and somatic experience, as well as just real life living and being a human. And so we're not just uncovering the subtle distinctions between maybe fleeting pleasure versus enduring contentment, but we're also going to look at the relationship between suffering and joy and our yoga practice, and how the yoga practice helps us to understand more deeply our attachments, our relationship to suffering and joy, and might also illuminate a path towards authentic happiness or joy. And so if you're a dedicated practitioner, or if you're just simply curious about living with greater presence and purpose, this is the episode for you. This conversation is going to invite you to reconsider what happiness means to you on your own journey. And we're going to explore this timeless question. So I want to jump right in. If you haven't signed up for my Ancient Breathing Masterclass, do it now. There's a link in the show notes. And my premier pranayama course, Ancient Breathing, will be opening soon, so stay tuned. Hi, welcome to the Finding Harmony podcast. Today, we are joined by our favorite people on the planet.
It's exquisite and so flattering that you would be with us, actually.
Again, returning guest.
Third time. Wow.
We have Richard Freeman and Mary Taylor. Hello, you two. How are
you? There.
I asked Harmony this question the other day. We had our son in the back seat, and he was kind of blissfully dark and moody. And we were just saying, well, what we want for you is for you to be happy. And we said that, and I said to Harmony, like, what do you think happiness is? And Harmony said, well, joy. And I said, well, I think happiness is contentment. And we thought it would be a great idea to get you on the show to talk about what happiness is, because this friction between us is why we're currently in a trial separation. So how can we moderate our existential predicament? This book, Feeling Happy.
Oh,
The yoga, body, heart, and mind.
It's so funny that you give that example with your son, because in that book that you just held up, that we happen to have authored, part of why we wrote it was when our son was just, early teens, when so many people are going through so much at that age. And, what am I going to do? And da, 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 da. And I remember this one day sitting there and saying, really, honey, all we want is for you to be happy. And he turned to me and he said, I don't know how to do that. And I put in the book, that's we dedicated part of it to him, because from that moment on, it's like, well, what is happiness? And how do you get to do that? Like, that's the thing you say to people, but what do we really mean by that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing, because I was just thinking an hour ago, like, how could I get our son to read this book? And I was like, that's a whole task in and of itself.
Just have him read the last little section where they're the bullet points. That's what they're for.
Yeah, that was the idea, is that, in fact, in the book, it says, if you're like most of us, just go to the very end of the book and maybe read it backwards.
Yeah. And so here, if you don't want to have patience to read all the other stuff, just look at these lines, they may help. And that's part of what we did with this book, was that, it is an issue for people who do yoga. Of course, I want joy, I want contentment, but everybody wants to be happy. And we wanted to write something that could use some of the wisdom that's classic in yoga about what suffering is and how to kind of weave your way through and out of it, but in a way that people who don't do yoga could understand and could possibly relate to. So as we were working on it, we had a few people in mind who are some of our favorite people because they make fun of us for doing yoga. And we'd say, well, would they understand this? Would they read this? And if we didn't feel that they would, then we'd rewrite it until we felt like, yeah, maybe this would be good for them to understand. And the definition that we finally have come up with in terms of where to start looking at what happiness is this basic human feeling of kind of a combination of those two things, of joy and contentment, of safety in being rooted in some truths of who you are, like knowing that you belong on this planet at this time, in this circumstance, that you're safe. And that then opens the door for feeling the sense of being enthralled with life. And that's what we're looking for. It's not all bliss. It's not all contentment. It has a taste.
It's not all
misery.
happiness. Yeah.
It's not all happiness.
Yeah, people, they have an idea of what happiness is, and it's kind of, silly. It has to do with what do they do on Saturday night, or what are they drinking or smoking, or who knows what, or how much money and power do they have, or are people praising them on social media,
Can they get on social media when you're our age? That makes you really happy.
Get on, yeah. And so it's really the sense of, what was the word you used? Amazement or awe with just the interconnectedness of things. And so someone might choose, something that makes them feel interconnected over something that gets them high.
Yeah. Sometimes those things that allow us to have that experience of interconnection also get us high because it's such a euphoric kind of experience, right? It's like the natural high. It's really incredibly euphoric because you sense that interconnection with all things. And then it's like what you're saying, you're appreciating the beauty. Like every moment sort of has a magical aspect to it.
Yeah. And, I think that that's what draws a lot of people to yoga is, you go into a class and you kind of let go of your ideas of what's supposed to happen or whatever, something just by chance, you fall into this space of ta-da, where there's this moment of that's indescribable. And that's what happiness is. And that's what I mean when I say of belonging, where you really feel like this is what it feels like to be alive. And yoga can do that for you. But then what happens in yoga, I think, is you have that experience. And then for 25 years, you keep
You're trying to repeat the experience.
going to the same spot in the same room, wearing the same clothes, or whatever.
Chant the same mantra. Yeah.
Or you get on like a train of, this is one of my questions for you, is it seems like at the beginning, especially like of a physical yoga practice, let's talk about that. But I think it's the same with all the practices. I think with a physical yoga practice, it does really kind of work to connect us with ourselves in a different way, which creates that feeling of euphoria or belonging, or like we belong to ourselves, we belong to the universe, to this interconnected web of consciousness. But then it's so interesting because those same patterns, and you talked a lot about the unconscious patterns, or the patterns of attachment, or the patterns of achievement, or the suffering, the obstacles, the kleshas, there's all kinds of names for them. But these patterns, they're so insidious that they start to then infiltrate our physical or spiritual practice. And then we're reinforcing those patterns of suffering in a weird way. And then the practice becomes actually kind of an object of suffering rather than an object of liberation. Can you talk to that cycle a bit?
Totally. Yeah. You totally, I mean, and we've all done that, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of part of the process.
Guilty.
Right?
Yeah,
Guilty as
guilty
charged.
as charged. And
every day.
And so as we thought about it, this is why we started looking at the idea of embodiment. And then what do you mean by embodiment? Because most people think it is like a physical practice.
Yeah.
But one way of looking at embodiment that is kind of has a different twist on it is that you do have the physical body, but then you also have the mind that in a sense is where you imagine your body, where you have thoughts, where you have all kinds of attachments, etc., and preconceptions. And so the mind becomes part of the embodied practice. And then you have the intuition, like the heart, the part that does get stimulated when you get into that space. And so we took them and said, well, you have the heart body, you have the mind body, you have the physical body, and that connecting them all. And when you think about it, it's actually true. They're all connected by the way we breathe, and the breath communicates intricately between all these parts of ourselves. Like when you have a negative thought or a, constricted thought, the breath just responds, and the breath doesn't go as deeply, etc. So what we try to do in talking about this subject is, well, we each have these different aspects of embodiment, and how do they become, like when we're born, they theoretically, and in moments of joy or contentment, they merge, but then we spend a lot of our lives where we're dominated physically, we're dominated by our neuroses or our mental constructs. And how do we bring them back into a sense of unification?
Yeah. And the tradition in both yoga and Buddhism, obvious, but then many other traditions is watch the breath. And then, but what do you mean by the breath? Is it the air that's going in and out of my nose? Yeah. But is it that feeling in my ribs when I really breathe in? Maybe. And so we have an idea of the breath, but the idea of the breath isn't necessarily the breath, because everything that you think, every mood, every story, there's sensations that correspond to it. Any little thought, even, like if you see your puppy in the background and instantly there's a pattern of sensation that you could say is in your heart. And that pattern of sensation is what we mean by breath. And so we have to very quickly redefine breath as that which is arising in the present moment. And the mind usually has to say, oh, that's what sensation is, and close. And so that which you're experiencing. And then when we think of the body, we have our pictures of the body that are on our phone, but then the actual sensation, it's arising in the form of like touch and sound and sight, and then smell and taste and everything has a correspondence that's immediate. And so by breath, that's a whole thing.
I was just thinking when I was coming down, I grabbed my coffee and I was going to come down and have a talk with you guys. And I was just thinking about how I was about to subject you to our personalities and a set of circumstances that were going to chemically and permanently affect you and your consciousness. And so it was going to affect your breath. It was going to affect your endocrine systems. You're going to have dopamine responses, and maybe if Harmony talks enough, some serotonin. And it was like, wow, like this.
We're going to be scarred.
You're going to be scarred.
Some scarred.
Some scarred. You're gonna be some scarred. Oh, I'm gonna write that down. And I know that you guys are in Thailand today, so I had a White Lotus reference for our listeners. There's an episode of White Lotus, which I know you haven't seen, where the dad in the show is very disturbed because his daughter wants to join a monastery and leave the family permanently and become a nun or an acolyte. And so the dad goes to interview the head of the Theravadan order to make sure that it's on the up and up, and this is not a cult. And he comes in and he's kind of confused and sweet and addled. We know that he's addled. And he just ends up asking, why does she want to do this? And it's really sweet. And the monk says to him, and forgive this long preamble, this little story.
This is good.
The monk answers, many young people from your country come here. They see back home people running from pain to pleasure, only to find more pain. And you cannot outrun pain. And so in this moment of like beautiful vulnerability, it's really affected the dad. And you can see that, oh, he's thinking to himself, I think I need this more than my daughter does. And he says, because he's having a lot of problems back home, he's going to be arrested and his business is done. And he says, so what happens when we die? And it's really sweet because the monk's answer, and I'll related so beautifully to your book. The monk answers, you are a droplet of water leaving an ocean and then returning to sink back into pure consciousness. And so in I think maybe your first or your second chapter, you describe happiness this way, that you're pure immersed in the ocean. And then you leave the ocean and you step on stones and you experience suffering again. But can you describe this happy field that is there for us, evidently, that we can always just immerse ourselves back into? What did you say?
I said drop into.
Drop back into.
Yeah, we described it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, metaphorically, that's exactly the image. And that's why we put that in there, is that it is, and it's not only happiness that is this sort of natural state of what it means to be human and to be in this world that is this interpenetrating sort of matrix of life, is that there are these capacities that humans have. And, we might argue that other creatures also have them, like your puppies, but they're capacities for love and for kindness, compassion, for generosity, the things that really connect. You think about the things that connect all of us. And they aren't all positive. I'm just thinking of, you said we're in Thailand. The other day I was driving home and we come up this road to the house in the jungle. And I was just coming along and I've never seen one, I've heard them, but there was a monitor lizard, a huge monitor lizard walking across the road, lumbering.
About 2 meters long,
Yeah.
when they're
really, really
or
big.
more.
It was kind of walking
That's
like
really
this.
big.
I was driving slowly. I come up and it looks up and it looks at me, and then it kind of goes, ah, and it turns around, lumbers, and goes back where it was. And it was this feeling of interconnectedness that wasn't necessarily blissful, but it was like, oh, we're in this together. And it's that field in which our own personal stories kind of fade into the background. That is that sense of this reservoir of what we call happiness, or what we call interconnectedness, compassion, kindness, love. It's the field where we are not the center of the story, which in White Lotus, it sounds like that suddenly the dad had that insight, yeah, he's got all this trouble at home and with his daughter and everything. And suddenly he was able to step outside his own story just long enough to start feeling like, oh, there's more to this than my mind distracts me in seeing every single day. And then someone like him becomes very successful financially, blah, blah, blah. And then you become even more taken with your own story. And so the happiness, that field of happiness, or that water that he was describing, really is the capacity to be able to release one's own story. So that's the droplet going into something far
See that
bigger.
it interconnects with everybody else's stories.
Yeah.
Everybody, you
Yeah.
know, all species.
Yeah. And that's what was so great
And
about
there's
that
something-
blizzard, was that it was like, oh my God, another car, It's like, oh, well.
Yeah, because cars are about the only thing that they have to, that they can't punch
Kick
out of the
with their
way.
tail.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So does that approach
Yeah.
what you're
Yeah.
asking?
Yeah,
Beautiful.
it's a description of the field, and we kind of want a roadmap,
No,
don't we,
no,
to
I
get
don't.
back into it. It's like, how do you immerse yourself into it? How do you remember?
Oh, that they were talking about, and that's where I wanted to go. This sensation, this mind, heart, body sensation. So there's something interesting about consciousness and this field of consciousness that you're talking about, and this interconnected consciousness, and how we experience it in our bodies as sensation. And like you were saying, every taste creates a sensation, but not just on our tongue, like through our whole body, every thought, every sound. And it's all this like vibration that we're picking up on in a mostly subconscious or unconscious way, that then we're interpreting in some way. And in your book, you talk about like the present moment, and then connecting to the present moment, which I'm understanding is connecting to this moment of pure sensation, pure consciousness, and how that is kind of the key to, without the story, without the judgment, without the attachment or the clinging or the resisting, right? Our raga dvesha, but just experiencing that pure sensation, whatever the sensation is, intense, gentle, mild, penetrating, whatever, and how that is sort of a key to our liberation, I think, or to this, like experiencing ourselves in this state that you're talking about, in this field of interconnection or consciousness. Am I right? Is that the key?
Yes. So we feel, and you occasionally get these, it's almost like you accidentally trip and fall into the water, because you can't really plan for it, because then there would be a method. But it's almost like just the nature of the water is so wonderful. And so your mind, you'll make a plan to get into it, but it doesn't always get you there. And so it's that ability to get so close to it, and then to keep practicing. Oh, I'm going to go and feel it. But of course, you're creating a formula. I'm going to meditate on the next inhale, which is a wonderful idea. I mean, and I'm going to feel it. But you have a picture of it. And so probably you need to practice more, because the thought, I'm going to meditate on the breath, is an influencing the breath.
Mhm.
Or even the thought, I'm going to be in the present moment, that becomes
Being in
problematic.
present.
Yeah, and then you're looking on your phone for photos
Yeah.
of the present moment.
What does
Yeah, what does it
AI,
look like? I got to
what
make
does
sure.
AI say about present moment?
And so we
Oh.
cannot help it, but we always create these formulas or these what I would classify as religions.
Yeah.
This is the path, this is the way. And a lot of them are good metaphors. They can be brilliant poetry, they could be terrible, like there are a lot of examples of that, but they can also be beautiful imagery and metaphors and stories and volumes of books. And then the idea is that if you really go into the feeling or the sensation of it, you start to see, oh, and you can't really say what it is you're seeing, but it's kind of like, I see through this, I see through the religion, I see through the technique, and it's almost like an accident. It's, the technique didn't really see, but it was the ability to see the technique rather than the technique took you to its goal.
And that's why we come back again and again to this idea of trust, that, that the ability, the capacity to feel this, like in a yoga class, is natural. It's just like Kevala Kumbhaka, which is this natural process where the breath stops in a moment of astonishment or awe or whatever. And that's a natural thing that happens. And that's what we mean by being integrated in an embodied sort of way, where the mind and the body and the heart are working together seamlessly, and you feel at home. And so you therefore feel stable and steady. And in a sense, you can trust your experience. You can trust, and that doesn't mean everything will go swimmingly, but it means that you have a sense of being able to face whatever it is that's there, that you're grounded. And so this ability to really drop in and trust your embodied experience is what I think is the real key to finding these states of equanimity, really, and the state of whatever it is you call it, that is this more consciousness, awakened embodiment, or joy, or contentment. And that's why we give this example. As a tiny little baby, it seems as though there are moments with most little babies where they're just there, where they're in awe, where they are deeply connected to everything around them. And or puppies or kittens are like that. And it's not anything fancy, it's just natural.
I was thinking about you being a foodie, Mary, and a student of Julia Child's, which some of our listeners may not remember. But as you were talking, and I was also thinking about this when Richard was talking about how, like, say, Lee Corso and Allen Ginsberg and the beat poets, maybe Shane Scaglione could speak about this with more passion. But thinking about how the beat poets would kind of drive themselves towards living in the now or living in the present. And if you can name or identify what the present is, then you don't have it. If you can name jazz, or if you can name Zen, then you don't know what it is. And Harmony and I think, finally kind of found ourselves in a kind of a beatnik Taoist flow that was just extraordinary. We ended up kind of going to like 5 different Michelin-star restaurants in 4 days. And it started with a total focus and concentration on sensation. And we were just so focused on our plate, and that other people kind of started to notice, that kind of vibrated. And then, we both like started like licking our plates.
And the food made me cry, Mary.
She started crying. And then people kind of came up to us and like, here, you should you should check this out. If you're really into this, you should try this. And then like this network of relationships of people who are all really into focused, concentrated awareness on a single sensation
Yeah.
started. We got a call. We were called from a Michelin-star restaurant in Amsterdam to go to another Michelin-star restaurant later that evening because they had heard about us, the premier foodies in Europe last week. And so we had to run to go to the other Michelin-star restaurants. Like, oh, we knew you were coming. We got a text. We were emailed about what you like. And
Wow.
and it became this kind of weird kind of beat, funky, hippie flow. And it all kind of like, it was like just kind of following like a Tibetan monk, just following luck and circumstance and see where it will lead you. And it just all stemmed from what we were like deeply concentrated on sensation. We said, this is kind of like a yogic practice. You said that to me in our first meal. Like, this really feels deeply concentrated. More yoga than I've done in a long time, you said. Does any of that resonate for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a description of the present moment. Where you weren't saying, well, let me drop into the present moment, let me be fully conscious. And then, you know, had you defined it as licking your plate or whatever it was, then it wouldn't have expanded in the way it did. But it's this thing where it takes on a life of its own. I think that's a great example of the present moment.
Yeah, but what happened?
We probably spent too much money.
But had an incredible time.
Yeah.
And then we missed our flight and spent way too much money to get home.
We missed our flight. That's really what happened.
Samadhi. You missed our exit, you know?
You missed your flight due to a meal?
Yeah.
Well-
Well, yeah. It all led to that.
It turned into chaos and confusion, really.
It really did turn
That's
into
great.
chaos.
That's impressive. It's impressive.
But we were able to keep the balance of our mind through all the highs
It
and the
was
lows,
so
the
much
suffering
about-
and the pleasure were in equal measure.
It was just so much about love and interconnectedness and community. And we kind of realized that the people that were feeding us and serving us were just like us. They had started poor and got into this because they loved it. They loved what you could do with your palate and how you could transform the experience of your palate and create love in someone else.
Yeah.
And create this kind of resonating story that may come generationally, and it may just come from something that happened in the moment to them last week, but then is developed on this plate and offered, you know, like an offering to Shiva, and then you destroy it
And become it.
Yeah, it becomes part of you and you become part of it. And that's
energetically. Yeah.
And then there's the residue. I won't explain that.
I'm gonna explain the residue because like we're here with the residue and we're trying to relate it to you somehow, which is impossible.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think you hit on something really beautiful, that it really did feel like connecting into that love. And I've often sort of said that love is the only reality. Like that is the context from which we really exist. And when we're in that flow of love, then, you know, we're connected to the present moment, or we're experiencing yoga because we're experiencing that love. And I'm curious how love and happiness, or love and this quality of interconnectedness, relate to each other.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that it's what you're saying, Harmony, that they really are one and the same and different, you know, with the same thing in different lights. And you know, we can describe something from different angles and then we see it more deeply and more fully. And so then as soon as you say, oh, it's love, then you get a definition of that, and that loses its depth.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Hmm.
And I think with the food, one of the things that strikes me with that example is that it is, it has this element of sort of that's out of your control when you ingest it. It's like it impacts your physical body and your mental state. And then when food or anything is presented with this feeling of love from someone with joy in their face, and in their hands when they're preparing the food, there is a quality that you can't describe, but that makes it different from, even a fine restaurant where someone is grumpy or just, indifferent.
Yeah.
The food is not the same. There is something, and,
Oh, you're thinking of Sweet Sisters.
I'm thinking of Sweet Sisters down the road from us.
Yeah,
which
we
is-
have near us one of the best restaurants in all of Asia called
Wow.
Sweet Sisters.
It's just amazing. And you find this, and you were finding people who had felt that quality of something indescribable. And I know you get all creeped out sometimes at the idea of this energy or that energy, because that term starts to be overused, but it
Yeah.
is sort of like this energetic quality that has this palpable change on things, that if you don't try to identify it, it is transformative. And that's what happiness is, and that's what love is, and that's what we all deserved as living sentient beings to share with each other,
Yeah.
and to share within our own corporeal experience. Like, oh, this is what it means.
Yeah. And food,
Yeah.
I mean, evolutionary wise, all of our ancestors were eating food. It's really weird, And you go back millions of years and millions of years, they're all like eating. And there's this meditation that I'm into where you are feeling the different elements in the body and through the flow of the breath in your nose. And it's used in pranayama. And when you get to the very top of the inhale and you've explored all of the different elements in the body because they correspond to different parts of your face, and then you pull the breath in all the way to the olfactory bulb, which is the first cranial nerve in the frontal sinuses, and this is for smelling. And dogs are the best at this, or elephants and dogs, I mean, we're way behind as humans. Then when you go and you just smell it, and the earth element, and you just go into this state of like suspension because you've finally gotten that smell of, you're a connoisseur of the true connoisseur, and you are cultivating that in the
pranayama.
pranayama, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's closely related,
Yeah.
but it's cheaper. This is like
It's true. So this is my other curiosity, because for many years you were practicing Ashtanga yoga,
Right.
in like let's call it a orthodox kind of way, as taught in Mysore by Sri K. Pattabhi Jois. But then at some point you like slowed it way down and started to, what I would assume, become very attentive and present to the sensation arising in each posture. At least that's what I noticed when I practiced with you before. But my question is, see, I have this theory that in order to really like drop into what you're talking about, this field of consciousness or this state of awareness or love or happiness, that we kind of have to slow it down.
that it's really hard to do when we're like busy or moving and breathing and going at a really fast pace. What do you think?
Although they're different personality types, you know. I mean, for me, I'm like into slow, but that's obvious, you know. And some people are just, but it would be the perfection of their kind of hyperactivity to, you know, and they might become dancers or something. Or
I think that
I'm just thinking of, you know, the different types of people. Say in the Gita, you know, there are people with different uh, tendencies or samskaras, and
Yeah.
they somehow can find it within their, you know, whatever their talent is. Um, but it does have these moments of slowing down, you know, when they go into the state of awe. But they might be in the middle of dancing.
and
Hopefully they don't fall over.
Like a trance state.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking of Sufi dancing.
Mhm, mhm.
And it seems like the part that for many people needs to slow down is the mind, less so than the body. The physical movements are less so than, you know, if you're breaking it into the heart, body, etc. It's that the mind gets wound up like a tightly wound, and then it boom. And then the tendency of mind is to dominate. And the tendency of mind is to become focused on the ego or manifest the ego, the I function, the me. And then that goes into this whole mind state where the mind is in control. You know, that's the part that sometimes it's almost like, you know, a kid who's been at a birthday party and had way too much sugar, and you need to just kind of hold them and let them calm down, and then they can come back to earth. And that's the part, at least for me, who I tend to be more the A-type personality in our relationship. And that's the part that spins out of control. And if I can slow it down and get it to focus on these other parts, that's how the internal awareness starts to wake up for me. But if you slowed your mind down too much, it would be, we'd have to get
I'd be
jumper
dead.
cables.
Can I ask you guys a personal question? You referenced it in the book, so I think it might be up for grabs. But it seems kind of apropos to our current conversation, thinking about our essence, and the two of you, you know, saying, well, I'm the slow one and I'm the A-type personality, to put it nicely.
Tightly wound.
Tightly wound.
Yeah.
And I just want to ask if this in some way relates to the ability to enter the field of happiness, because you did mention how Richard seemed impervious to depression, whereas you, Mary, like Harmony and I both, there is a I like to indulge in depression and follow its route and really sit with it, and then I can get into my Nick Drake albums and really be there with it. I'm not sure, Harmony, do you like it as much as I do? I don't know.
Sure, I
It's a
enjoy
way
it.
of focusing, it seems.
I become, when I mentioned in the intro that as a kid and even as an adult, you know, I've had severe depression, and it's not fun. It's like you feel like you're in a hole that's dug in the middle of, you know, some desert somewhere, and there's no way out, and it's dark. There's no creative energy. It's a really horrible experience for me. So I don't like indulging in it. And yoga, physical movement and getting the body moving with the practice, which helped to kind of integrate things a little bit in me, was a key factor. And probably getting older, you know, itself also helped sometimes with depression, but it was a key factor in being able to work my way, you know, so that I could foresee the circumstances arising that would draw me into that pit, that and then navigate around them, and so that because yeah, for me it was never fun. I don't know about you, Harmony, if you had it like that, but
Yeah, no, it was not fun.
yeah.
I wouldn't classify it as fun.
Yeah, and or even something that I could indulge in because when I was there was nothing, it felt like there was no other option. I felt like there was nothing else I could do. And that was the part I think sometimes that, is for someone who hasn't had that, it's hard to understand, why don't you just snap out of it? And it's like, I wish I could. Boy, do I wish I could. And over the years, I think you've had more insight into what that experience is, that people actually had this happen to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one of the beauties of the yoga practice is you can, moving the body in these patterns, vinyasa patterns, you can get to the feeling, the sensations associated with the depression and work with it. Whereas, and some of these meditation traditions without the awareness of the breath or the yoga influence can actually make people more depressed. And there's some pieces of a lot of traditions that are very sad. And so we don't recommend that they go off. There's certain approaches to meditation that we try to stop people from playing with.
Yeah, there's a wonderful author and playwright, I think his name is Andrew Solomon, who himself suffered from severe depression to the point, where he would become almost catatonic. And brilliant man, and I've watched things of his on the internet, some talks of his, and he's studied depression. And we're not saying that everybody who has depression that yoga can help, because it can't. And even if you like, if I feel like I'm getting depressed and I think, okay, I'll just do yoga, that doesn't necessarily help. I've learned other methods, but with Andrew Solomon, one of the things that I loved about listening to him is that he had done research around the world, because he became famous among people because he was very famous to begin with, and he said he'd suffered from severe depression. And people would then come up to him and say, oh, well, this worked for you, and such and such worked for me, and such worked for me. And he started telling, like, one of the things I remember is this woman came up and said, knitting little pom-poms works for me. To me, the commonality is that something that in a way brings these parts of you together. And in a way, knitting a pom-pom is this thing of like interfacing with the world. When you're deeply depressed, you just feel like you are completely alone. And that's the rub.
Powerless too, I think.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You feel like you have no power. You can't get any traction on it. And so
no
kind of
traction.
fall into like a bit of into that victim space. And it's hard to get out of that once you're really fully in it.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting, the knitting of the pom-poms, because there's a sense of control and also then accomplishment.
Yeah.
Which creates like kind of that generative cycle within our, psyche. Yeah. And also it has to, mind, body, heart.
Yeah,
they're cute.
Exactly. Yeah.
What are some of the things that have worked for you? Because you said that you wouldn't just do yoga.
For me, and this is just personally for me. For me, one of the things that has often helped is to change physical locations, like go to visit a person who I know loves me, who's a dear friend, and just spend some time with them. And not that I don't think you love me, but, to change my physical environment. Yeah. And then, but continue my routines, like do my yoga, etc. Yeah.
I think that helps for me too. I find if I'm in the same place doing the same thing day after day, I start to feel quite depressed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I like to change things up. I don't like to always have the same.
And
Yeah.
again, this is the reason
Routine.
why we're in a trial separation. I like to do
Eat the
exactly
same thing every
same
day.
thing every day, eat the same food. I once ate a bowl of rice with raw greens every day for dinner for 7 years.
Oh my goodness.
Wow, that
I was-
sounds healthy.
I was really happy.
Yeah.
And it was only being forcibly married that I changed that. When we were in Scandinavia, we picked up this book. It was called The Almost Nearly Perfect People, because the Scandinavians, even though they live in the most depressively horrific environment,
It's not
dark,
that bad.
Yeah.
cold all the time, they are described as the happiest people on earth.
Yeah.
And I was reading the book, trying to look into it, like, why would my ancestors be happy? And then why would they leave? That was true and move to Canada.
Another cold, dark place.
And besides high taxes and income equity, which is a big piece of happiness, as it turns out for people,
Mhm.
the other thing is sangha. They didn't use that word, but the really going out of your way, like literally going out of your way to meet other people
Mhm.
and relate with them, whether it's line dancing or pickling vegetables or what have you, or doing a yoga class,
Pickleball.
pickleball, just as good as a yoga class. Like that
That's
was
a
like
big
the
one now.
main key was like that social connectedness, is to, as you said, getting out and meeting someone else, changing your environment. All of that gets wrapped up into like going off into a different sangha on Tuesday night, which
Right.
I do not like leaving the house.
You do like joining weird clubs.
I do have a lot of weird clubs that I'm part of.
No, it's true. I mean, finding people who are not necessarily like-minded. In other words, seeing diversity, seeing that you can relate to all kinds of different people can be very, very helpful. And looking at the Finnish population, which they often are listed as the happiest in
Yeah.
the world. And one of the other things they talk about is connecting to nature, making sure you are getting out into nature, which again is connecting to others.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't have to be humans. I mean,
Thankfully.
well, one of the beauties of here where we are is that, you just walk outside and all the different creatures, the different trees, the different insects, the different birds, the different things, you don't even know what they are. And then you go out and you see the stars, it's pretty amazing. We were just watching the moon last night and this morning, and it's just like, wow. And a lot of times people, they don't pay attention to what's happening. And that's why it's nice to just to change, like if we go down into, down to you start, all of a sudden you start to notice stuff just because you've changed, you haven't imprinted the mind so much.
Mm.
And that's why changing, going and hanging out with somebody. There are certain people that, you don't want to hang out with.
Yeah, that's true.
They can be educational at the same time.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I think I learned from you. The foundational principle that I learned from you is to pay attention to what makes your mouth drop open. What drops your palate? What opens you to awe? And to really finally observe the kaleidoscope of situations in your life and circumstances that can lead to that happening.
Yeah.
And then just about any damn thing on earth can be yoga at that point.
Mm-hmm.
That's convenient. Yeah.
I think also what I love about your book is it really is about bringing yoga into your life. Like some of the simple, straightforward, easy things you can do. Like really, I mean, beautiful concepts like, returning to softness, being in the present, connecting to the sense of belonging, to your place in the world. And for me, those are things that really like most people don't think of as yoga, but it
Yeah.
really is the essence of the practice of yoga. And the asana for me feels like it's very like outside in kind of. It seems very external to what you're speaking about in how to be embodied, which is really like inside out. And it's not that we can't be embodied in our asana practice, but I think often we're trying to do asana to get embodied when really it's like the opposite thing has to happen in order for the practice to work.
Exactly. And for many of us, have to go through the outside in asana practice to get there.
Yeah.
And that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you get there and then you're like, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Now we got to start over again.
I remember our late friend Rolf also recommended LSD for those at home. It's a way to kick the door in if you need to find a way to how to do that.
Maybe before we go drop some LSD tonight. No, we're not doing that.
Okay.
You could talk just a little bit about this idea of looking again, because I think looking again is a really beautiful concept and practice that, people can really start to do, like really questioning some of the things that we take for granted in our everyday life.
Yeah. Yeah, looking again is just to see that your mind labeled what you were doing and then went off. And to look again is to say, oh, and this is like the whole idea of sati or smriti, which is look again or be mindful. And so because the mind will wander, it'll start to wander off. And if you look again, you can see it wander off. And then you look again at looking again. So you got to keep looking again and again. It's almost like starting over, back to zero.
Yeah, and every time you blink, you're looking at something with fresh eyes. And so you get the opportunity to see something slightly differently. And then you build it out into more and more dimensions of understanding. So
it's so beautiful because I love just this idea of like everything, we have such a tendency to just label things like you're saying, and then we're like, oh, I know that, and we like shove it in the drawer in the back of our mind, and then it just sits there. And even I think with people, it's really a beautiful practice too, because Richard and Mary, you've been on our podcast like this the third time, but every time we've connected with you, it's fresh. You're different people. And so even though we've had you on in the past, actually, this is all new. And we're never like, even with your spouse, like every minute, it could be potentially a new person if you allow it to be, right?
yeah.
Rather than just
Same old, yeah.
rather than just like putting that label on like, oh, that's this person, and then you just assume that they're the same, right?
It's true. I mean, and I think that's with all relationships. If you freeze frame them from the first time you actually interface with them, it's a dead relationship. So you have to just always keep looking again and looking at yourself, because you're not the same either.
Exactly. So then it's like you're really in that river of change or in that ocean.
Yeah.
There's a lovely quote on the front of this book, Feeling Happy, by Roshi Joan Halifax. This deep and wondrous book is a raft that brings the reader to the shore of joy. And that reminds me of when my friend Robbie Cavallero in the 70s would go to Esalen and he would meditate with Joan Halifax. And she would sit on the diving board naked, meditating. And he would also look again. Yeah.
Well, that's a good, a nice little story that I'm going to work with her in a few weeks, and I'm maybe I'll bring that up, but probably
Might bring
not.
that up.
Probably not.
You'll find an opportunity.
She's not the same person
Oh,
anyway.
it's true.
She's an amazing woman. I can imagine back in the 70s her doing that. She's now almost 83, and wow,
Glorious.
she's like so deeply wanting to help, as she puts it, this tangled world.
Beautiful. Well, we're very, very grateful that you came and helped our tangled world today.
It's such a delight always to see both of you. Thank you so much for, connecting. And we always say, let's do more together, and we should.
Yeah, thanks for looking into this.
Thanks for looking again.
Yeah.
I can't stress enough what an honor it is. It's just a joy, and it doesn't feel deserved. But thank you for being here.
He has to
Thank
work
you.
on his self-worth over here.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us for this beautiful and illuminating conversation with Richard Freeman and Mary Taylor. Their reflections on yoga and the breath just really remind us of something so simple and yet so profound, that within each inhale and each exhale lies a direct portal to peace, to joy, to ease, and to simply being alive, to experiencing the full range of emotions and learning how to be with each emotion, each sensation, each breath as it arises will help us reclaim our inner sanctuary, regulate our nervous system, and dissolve some of the noise that creates discomfort or dis-ease as we go through life. So if this conversation resonated with you, then I'd love to invite you to join me for my free pranayama masterclass. Learn 3 pranayama techniques to help regulate your nervous system. And I'm personally going to guide you through this sacred, time-tested breathwork practice that can transform your stress into calm, your fatigue into energy in as little as 90 seconds. It's happening on May 10th and May 11th, and you can sign up. Find the link in the show notes. And if you're ready to dive even deeper and you know it now, then be sure to join Ancient Breathing 2.0, my 6-week journey into the deep science and the spirit of pranayama, kriyas, chakras, Ayurveda. It begins Sunday, May 18th, and this is really where the deep rewiring happens. I would be honored to have you join me for this round of live classes. And so you can find that link also in the show notes, or head to my website and you'll find all the information there for Ancient Breathing 2.0. Until then, may you continue with your awareness of sensation, of breath, of the present moment, and move deeply into the heart of compassion, resting in this subtle vibration of peace and joy. That's it. We've concluded another episode of the Finding Harmony podcast. I just want to thank you so much for doing the work that changes the world, starting with yourself. It truly does make a huge difference. Please make sure you have your automatic downloads turned on wherever you listen so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes. I have so much more magic I can't wait to share with you. Lastly, if you're on Instagram, I love connecting and hearing from you. So come on over and say hello at Finding Harmony Podcast. And you can also come say hello to me personally at Harmony Slater Official. Thank you again for being here. I cannot wait to share more with you in our next episode.